While the war still thundered across Europe and cities lay under clouds of smoke, the first transports of prisoners began to cross the Atlantic. After the campaigns in North Africa and Italy, thousands of German soldiers fell into Allied hands. Following the Geneva Convention, the United States decided to transfer a large portion of them overseas. Thus began a story in which enemies became part of a distant and unfamiliar land, America. The path to that new world began at the ports. In collection points across France, Algeria, Naples, and Casablanca, prisoners were assembled in columns, registered, fingerprinted, and given simple numbered tags. Most had no belongings left, only gray coats and exhaustion. They were loaded onto transport ships, where the cargo holds had been turned into temporary barracks. Beneath the steel decks, their voyage into the unknown began. The crossings lasted for weeks. Convoys moved under destroyer escort, wary of submarines. The hold smelled of oil and seawater. The prisoners were fed twice a day, given drinking water, and sometimes allowed on deck. For the first time in years, many saw a night sky without searchlights and a sea without mines. This strange sense of freedom coexisted with the realization of captivity. No one knew what awaited them on the far shore. When the ships reached American ports New York, Boston, Norfolk, or New Orleans, the prisoners saw a country that had previously existed only in propaganda. Towering cranes, rail lines, endless warehouses, and a calm, efficient order. Everything happened quietly. Guards gave clear, measured instructions. There were no threats, no shouting. It surprised men who had braced for revenge or humiliation. At transfer stations, they were divided into groups and sent inland. Trains carried them through fields, cities, and open plains toward camps being built according to a single design. For most, America itself remained incomprehensible. Through the train windows stretched miles of roads, farms, and small towns, a landscape of stability and abundance. Everything appeared peaceful, untouched by war. Prisoner of war camps were located across the country, from California to Georgia, from Texas to Minnesota. They were built quickly, but carefully. Each camp was divided into zones: barracks, medical units, storage areas, kitchens, and assembly grounds. Guard towers stood along the perimeter, though the soldiers atop them rarely showed hostility. Everything operated by the book. Upon arrival, prisoners were registered again, measured, and given medical exams. Each received clean clothes, a blanket, a metal bowl, and a cup. For many, this was the first sense of order after months of chaos. Medical officers, Americans, and Red Cross workers recorded illnesses, treated wounds, and distributed medicine. Even at this early stage, the prisoners realized that the system they had entered worked differently from their own. In the first days, conversations centered not on the enemy, but on comparison. Those who had endured German disciplinary units or military prisons were struck by the contrast. Here, there were no beatings, no random punishment, no shouting. In letters later sent home, the same phrase appeared again and again: "They treat us better here than our own did." Camp life soon settled into a rhythm: morning reveille, roll call, breakfast. The American camps maintained food standards in accordance with international law, roughly 3,000 calories per day. Meals included bread, porridge, meat, vegetables, and coffee. Prisoners were astonished by the small details: fresh bread, clean dishes, organized kitchens. After the ruins of the front, it all seemed almost unreal. Work became part of the routine. The American command understood that occupied men caused fewer problems. Prisoners were sent to farms, road repair crews, woodworking and tailoring shops. Their labor was paid in camp currency, small tokens, exchangeable for soap, paper, tobacco, or chocolate. That miniature economy gave the illusion of a world with its own internal balance. Some camps lay in the hot southern states, where the sun burned even in winter. Others stood in the northern plains, where snow reminded them of home. Yet, despite the differences, the principles were the same: food, medical care, order, and safety. The Geneva Convention was not a mere formality for the Americans. It functioned as a working manual. In the evenings, after dinner, the camps grew quiet. Some men wrote letters, others read newspapers provided by the Red Cross. Occasionally, small concerts or sports games were organized. The administration encouraged such activities, seeing them as ways to keep morale steady. In these details, one could see a pragmatic kind of humanity, not sentimental, but disciplined and deliberate. For men who had survived frontline chaos and prison marches, the American camps became a strange refuge. There was no ideology, no shouting, no fear. Life returned to simple habits: sleeping without alarm, eating on schedule, working without coercion. This quiet order would later echo in their letters home, a sense of astonishment that the enemy had shown a kind of order long lost in their own homeland. The American authorities viewed these camps not only as an obligation, but as an investment in the future. Archival reports noted, "Humane treatment of prisoners reduces resistance and promotes reflection." Historians would later cite this phrase as an example of pragmatic humanism born in the midst of war. For the prisoners themselves, that humanism existed in small things: a hot meal, a clean bed, a medical dressing, permission to write home. And it was these simple details that shaped the sentences that would astonish those still in Germany. "They treat us better here than our own did." Once the initial confusion of arrival faded, camp life in America settled into a rhythm that surprised those who had expected punishment. Each day unfolded with almost mechanical precision. Wake-up call, roll call, breakfast, work assignments, lunch, evening inspection. There was order in everything. The system functioned quietly, without shouting or brutality. For the prisoners, it was the first experience in years where routine did not mean fear. The barracks were long wooden structures with narrow windows and small stoves for heating. Each man had his bunk, a blanket, a locker for personal items, and basic utensils. The air smelled of soap and pine wood rather than damp and decay. Water came from wells or pipes, and electricity was available in the evenings. Compared to the conditions many had endured in Europe, these camps were remarkably functional. The daily schedule was simple. Breakfast, usually oatmeal, bread, and coffee, was followed by morning work assignments. Groups left under guard for surrounding farms, construction sites, or workshops. They repaired machinery, built fences, or harvested crops. Payment came in the form of small paper coupons or tokens, which could be used in the camp canteen. This small economy created a sense of stability, even dignity. A man could buy tobacco, soap, or stationery, modest comforts that symbolized control over one's own life. The American government regarded the prisoners as a labor resource, but also as individuals protected by law. Reports from the War Department listed the exact caloric value of meals, the medical supplies per camp, and the ratio of guards to prisoners. Discipline was firm, but never arbitrary. Guards followed procedure rather than emotion. Physical punishment was forbidden. Complaints were processed through appointed representatives among the prisoners. Such bureaucracy, unfamiliar to men used to military hierarchy, became a shield against chaos. The food itself remained a source of constant astonishment. While their families in Germany faced shortages and rationing, the prisoners ate regularly and well. Meat, vegetables, bread, and even small portions of dessert appeared on the menu. In letters home, many avoided writing about the abundance for fear of sounding arrogant. Yet the difference was impossible to ignore. Some wrote cautiously, "We are being fed sufficiently. You would not believe how much they respect their own rules." Medical care followed the same principle of efficiency. Each camp had a small hospital with American and sometimes German medical staff. Wounds were cleaned, fevers treated, and dental care provided. For many, it was their first real medical attention since the beginning of the war. Vaccinations were mandatory. and serious cases were transferred to Army hospitals. Records from the Red Cross confirm that mortality rates in the American camps were extremely low. For the prisoners, that fact itself was shocking that an enemy would care enough to keep them alive and healthy. Inside the wire, life built its own order. The prisoners organized libraries, orchestras, art classes, even small schools where former teachers lectured on history or mathematics. The Americans tolerated and sometimes supported these initiatives. It kept morale high and prevented unrest. In some camps, workshops produced furniture, carvings, or drawings that were later sent to local communities as tokens of goodwill. The social structure within the camps evolved naturally. Former officers retained informal authority, but in time, rank lost importance. Skills became more valuable, the ability to repair an engine, teach English, or manage supplies. The community operated like a small, self-contained town. Each man contributed what he could, and in return found a fragile sense of belonging. Evenings were quiet. After dinner, prisoners gathered in the open areas, talking softly, smoking, or writing letters. The setting sun cast long shadows over the fences, and for a few hours the war felt far away. Some men kept diaries. Others painted landscapes of memory fields, forests, homes they would perhaps never see again. These acts were not rebellion but survival, ways to preserve the idea of self beyond the number on the identification tag. American officers noticed that the German prisoners adapted faster than expected. They were disciplined, skilled, and often eager to organize themselves. For the guards, it was a strange coexistence. Both sides, bound by duty, yet learning mutual respect through routine. Reports from 1944 describe the camps as quiet, clean, and cooperative. Problems were rare. The greatest challenge was boredom, the slow, monotonous passage of time in a place defined by rules and fences. Despite the predictability, a silent transformation occurred. The prisoners began to compare not only food and treatment, but entire systems. For men raised in a culture of strict obedience, the American emphasis on regulation without cruelty felt alien. Many later described the experience as their first encounter with fairness as an organizing principle. It did not make them loyal to their captors, but it changed their view of power. There were moments of sorrow, too. Letters returned unopened, marked, address unknown. News arrived of destroyed cities, missing families. The camp, once a place of confinement, began to feel like a refuge. Behind the wire, life was stable. Beyond it, everything had collapsed. This realization filled many with guilt, to live safely while their own people starved. It was a guilt that found expression in quiet restraint, in understated words like, "I am fine. I hope you are safe." By the end of 1944, American records counted over 370,000 German prisoners held across the United States. Most worked, studied, or simply waited. The war in Europe was nearing its end, and with it came uncertainty. What would happen next? Punishment, release, or silence? Few thought of escape. Most simply hoped for news from home. In the months that followed, daily life in the camps continued as before, organized, disciplined, humane. The rhythm of captivity became the rhythm of endurance. And somewhere between duty and habit, the prisoners found a fragile peace. The phrase that appeared again and again in their letters, "They treat us better here than our own did," was not written out of gratitude. It was written as a statement of fact. For many, it was the first acknowledgement that even in war, decency could exist without weakness. For the prisoners, the letters became their bridge to the world beyond the fences. Each man was allowed to write 2 pages every few weeks using pre-printed forms supplied by the camp administration. The process was simple but sacred. Paper and envelopes were issued at fixed times, and every line was subject to censorship. Yet even under such control, The letters carried genuine voices, fragments of a life that persisted in captivity. The writing itself was ritualistic. Men sat at long tables in the barracks, bent over their papers in silence. The room smelled of ink and dust. Outside, guards patrolled the fences, but inside, there was peace. Some wrote with precision. Others hesitated over every word, aware that each sentence would pass through the hands of American and German censors. They learned to speak in coded normality, to describe life without politics, to express feelings through simple observation. Most letters began the same way. "I am alive and well." The sentences that followed described the weather, the work, the food, the order of life in the camp. There was little room for emotion, yet emotion seeped through in small details, mentions of warm meals, medical checkups, or time spent reading. For families in ruined German cities, these reports sounded almost unbelievable. The contrast between their own hunger and the prisoner's stability was hard to accept. Censors in the United States removed military information, but rarely altered the tone. American authorities saw the letters as proof of their adherence to international law. In Germany, however, postal monitors under the Nazi regime reacted differently. Reports mentioning good treatment by the enemy were flagged, sometimes confiscated, sometimes allowed through with warnings. But the sheer volume of mail made control impossible. News of humane conditions spread quietly among civilians, challenging the image of the brutal, vengeful enemy. The prisoners themselves felt uneasy about that contrast. Many were ashamed to describe their lives honestly, knowing their families faced air raids and shortages. Some avoided details, writing only about memories of home. Others, unable to hide the truth, expressed gratitude in plain terms. Historians later found recurring lines in the archives. "We are treated correctly, even kindly. There is order here. They follow their own rules more carefully than ours ever did." The letters did not glorify captivity. They reflected a strange equilibrium, an existence between defeat and survival. For many, it was their first encounter with an authority that did not depend on fear. That realization became the unspoken message between the lines. The enemy, who had been portrayed as merciless, had revealed himself as bound by law. It was a dissonance that forced reflection, even self-criticism. American officers observed that letter writing reduced anxiety and discipline problems. Mail days were described as the quietest in the camps. Rows of men hunched over paper created an image unlike any wartime scene, a landscape of stillness. When the letters were collected, they were checked, stamped, and sent across the ocean through the Red Cross channels. Some took months to arrive. Others never did. The ones that came back, marked address unknown, were devastating. They signaled what words could not say, that homes had vanished, that cities were gone. For those who received such letters, the camp no longer felt like a prison but a fragile shelter from the ruins of their world. Safety itself became a source of guilt. With time, the letters grew more reflective. Mentions of daily routines gave way to broader thoughts about fate and the end of the war. Some men began to describe a sense of quiet understanding that survival depended not on ideology, but on order and decency. In this recognition, the phrase, "they treat us better here than our own did," stopped sounding like irony and became a statement of human truth. When the war finally ended and repatriation began, many prisoners kept copies of their letters or received them back from families. Decades later, historians and archivists would find these fragile sheets in attics and boxes, yellowed but legible. They revealed not political confession, but a testimony of human endurance. The handwriting was steady, the tone restrained. Yet between the lines, there was a quiet astonishment that in captivity, some had found more humanity than in their own army. In post-war Germany, the topic remained uncomfortable for years. Former prisoners who spoke about fair treatment were often met with disbelief. The country wanted to rebuild, not to revisit moral paradoxes. Only much later, through documentaries and exhibitions, Did the letters resurface as historical evidence not of surrender, but of survival through decency? For the Americans, the archives of the War Department recorded these camps as logistical successes, examples of effective administration. But in retrospect, their legacy became something else entirely, a demonstration of how law could humanize even the machinery of war. The humane treatment of prisoners turned into a quiet symbol of post-war reconciliation. Today, those letters are preserved in museums and libraries, their language simple and almost childlike. There are no dramatic lines, only facts. The food is good. We work every day. We have books and music. I am fine. Yet it is precisely that restraint that makes them powerful. They capture a rare perspective, a moment in history when humanity crossed enemy lines. Behind those words lies the moral weight of contradiction. That in war, justice and cruelty are not always divided by sides. The letters from German prisoners in America stand as reminders that dignity can survive captivity, that even within barbed wire, respect can exist. Their authors never intended to write history. They wrote to reassure their families, to keep hope alive. But their words outlived them, turning private correspondence into quiet evidence of something larger, that humanity, once expressed, can endure beyond war, beyond victory or defeat. And so the sentence that echoed through those thousands of letters, "They treat us better here than our own did," remains more than an observation. It is a lesson written in ink by men who had seen both cruelty and restraint, and who discovered that sometimes compassion speaks most clearly through discipline, law, and order.